This is a conversation on July 31st, 1994, with Langdon Smith.
I'm just going to mention a few things that happened, the way I got into the service and what happened to me after. So, as I think you know, I was born in St. Louis, Oklahoma, and went to school in Newcastle, Oklahoma. Went to Central State College and was there 4 years. In the meantime, in October 1940, the selection committee to get new Army recruits came in October of 41, and I was the second person that I knew who was lucky enough to have their number drawn in November of 41. And November of 40, that is. So, but they deferred me until my school was out in May, and by the time they got all the papers filled out and ready for me, it was August 21st, 1941, when they called me to my county seat for induction, physical. I believe there were 48 that they called in to the county seat, which I believe is 21 of us passed their physical. They sent us on to the state capital, Oklahoma City, whereby I believe there was 158 of us gathered there, and out of that number, there was, I believe, 71 that passed the physical. Of course, a great many of those who failed later, after the war was started, were inducted. And, of course, as I say, when they drafted me, and I went to the recreation center in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. That was August 21st. And I stayed around reception center for about a week, I guess it was, falling out for different things. They would take people out and send them to different parts of the world. And what kind of got me one afternoon was they had us all fall out. We always fell out in our raincoats. That's all we had on, is raincoats, and it was August, so you can kind of figure out how hot it was. So that afternoon in particular, though, they blew the whistle, and we all fell out in our raincoats and lined up. And they asked for all those who were at least 6 feet tall and weighed between 170 and 200 pounds to fall out over here. So that didn't sound like a very good detail to me. So I didn't fall out, and the guy next to me kept looking up at me as if, to say, why don't you fall out? And I said, I'm too heavy. I weigh 202. And it so happened that they took that group and shipped them to Italy to a mule pack outfit. Of course, I think that the troops came up through Italy toward Germany at this time. This was before the war actually was declared, and they need these mule pack outfits to carry their weapons and so forth through the mountains, over the mountains, and wherever. So I was kind of glad not to be a part of that group. Of course, then I stayed around the reception center. I guess I was around there about a week. Finally, after about a week, and them calling everybody out, blowing the whistle every day for several times for you to fall out, and they'd take certain people out and in, and there'd been many come in. Ordinarily, you only stayed in reception center about 2 to 3 days, and then you would be going somewhere. But I'd begin to think that maybe there must be something wrong. I stayed around there a whole week and nothing had happened. So one afternoon they called me to headquarters there to bring 2 or 3 other people down there to clean up headquarters. So I took the other 2 or 3 people down there to clean up. And of course, while that was going on, I was talking to the sergeant down there and asked him why I was hanging around reception center all that length of time and nobody else was there that went in when I did, or even some of them later. And he said he didn't know, but he'd get my folder and check. So he did, and he looked at it, and it says here that you might be a prospective Air Corps signer. He said, do you want to go into the Air Corps? And of course, knowing this was before the war was declared in December, and I was expecting to serve my year and get out, and but not thinking I was going to be in for more than a year. I wasn't too interested in joining the Air Corps because I thought it was a longer term to serve probably. So I told him no. He said, well, what would you like to get in? I said, I don't know anything about any of it. Would you tell me a little bit about some of the different branches of service? So he talks about the artillery and about the base being there at Fort Sill, and I could stay at Fort Sill. And of course, me being an old country boy, I kind of wanted to stay as close to home as I could. And that being close to home, and also artillery had a lot of math to it. I figured I could use what math I learned in the artillery, whereby I might not be able to use it in a lot of other places. So I told him I believe I'd like to go into the artillery, and he asked me where I wanted to go, and I said I'd like to stay here at Fort Sill. So the next morning I got my orders to go to the 77th Field Artillery Battalion there on the base at Fort Sill. And of course I went there, and time went on, and of course on the day that war was declared, I believe December the 6th of 1941, a whole group of us we were playing bridge. At the time we heard the news over the radio that war had been declared. So that night we had blackout. We couldn't go outside and smoke, couldn't light any kind of lights, and they stopped all people from going anywhere. And so that put a different light on the situation. And of course, that song "I'll Be Back in a Year, Little Darling," that kind of went out the window about that time. So we all knew that we were going to be in there for more than a year. In the meantime, we went to Camp Bowie down at Brownwood, Texas, and I don't think I've spent any colder nights than I did down there on a few maneuvers. And I found out a few things that I didn't know before, that you can sleep, your feet stay warmer sleeping with your shoes off than they will with them on. And also that you can sleep warmer on the ground, even though it's frozen. You can sleep better on the ground than you can up in the back end of a iron bed truck. So it's a few things that were pretty tough down at Brownwood. So knowing how tough it was, I decided maybe there could be something else a little better to look forward to. So they asked me if I didn't want to go to OCS. So at that time I decided maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea. So they called me before the board. I believe there were about 5 officers, I think colonels and maybe a general or 2 sitting across the table from me. And it's pretty tough to sit there and answer questions, that many of them asking you one question after another. But anyway, they said I passed, so they sent me back to Fort Sill to go through OCS. And of course, while I was there, that was one of the toughest things that I guess I went through. They seemed to want to pick on you. And, they give you all these commands, these little lieutenants that about 5'2", telling you to do this and do that and do this. A lot of them were just trying to make you mad, I think, which they did a pretty good job of doing. And at one time, I was ready to let them have it back, and it happened to be on a Thursday afternoon when it was getting on me pretty heavy. So Friday, I decided I'd stick with it till Friday and go home Friday night. So I went home Friday night with the idea of telling my parents that I was going to ship out. I wasn't going to stay in that thing. Well, at that time, they were shipping about everybody overseas. If they flunked out or quit, well, they were shipped overseas to some kind of a unit. So I knew where I was going if I quit. So I told my mother and sister, and they told me that not to do it. So I stayed in and went back, and of course everything got a little better from there on. Of course, when I graduated then, they sent me to a new division, the 102nd Division at Camp Maxey. That was at Paris, Texas. Of course, when I got to Paris, Texas, of course, I found that all they had for this new division was a few officers and a few NCOs who had come from other places. And we had to wait, I expect it was at least 2 or 3 weeks before we got all of our people to fill out the 102nd. And of course, I guess you know what a division includes. It includes artillery, infantry, engineers, medical people, quartermaster, that's supply, and so forth. So it includes a lot of different branches, different kinds of work. And so when we got all those, we started work there at Camp Maxey. And we worked and trained, and I'd say around, well, it was November, I believe, we went on maneuvers in Louisiana. And of course, for 3 or 4 times before we actually left Maxey, we'd load up at midnight or 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, ride around the rest of the night, and end up right back there where we started from. So the idea there, they didn't want anybody to know what the troops were doing, where they were going, or what. So it was a little hard to take loading up at that time of night, driving around all night and coming back to where you started from. But that's what happened anyway. So, but finally one night we did actually, when we loaded up, well, we drove around and we drove to Louisiana and went on maneuvers for about 2 months there. And of course, as you know, in Louisiana it rains an awful lot. And that's in the fall of the year, and they must have had an excessive rain that year. That was in 43. And every night the water would run down through your bedroll or wherever you happen to be. So you got pretty well wet every night that you were there. And we were near Camp Polk. And I think by the time we got off that, everybody was ready to go overseas or ready to go anywhere. I know I went to Alexandria on leave one Saturday afternoon. We'd usually get about one afternoon every 2 or 3 weeks, and we go places. I went to Alexandria, and I can remember sitting up in the hotel there and practically crying because I wanted to go on overseas. I couldn't stand that stuff. But of course, by the time came to go overseas, I wasn't quite ready to go then. But anyway, we made it through the maneuvers in Louisiana, and then they shipped us to Austin in October, I believe it was, of 43. That was at Camp Swift. which I think most of you probably been by there or near there. It's Bastrop, and so that's where Jerry was lucky enough to meet me, and of course I kept going by and she couldn't run me off, so finally we got married, and we stayed there till I believe it was May, and they decided to ship us to Trenton and overseas. Yeah. So we rode the train from Swift to Trenton, New Jersey, and got up there. I thought it'd be cooler up there, but I think it's hot as Texas. It was hot, and of course no air conditioning, no anything. So we had a pretty good time. Jerry drove in the car with another lady, a friend's car, to Trenton and stayed. And of course, we got to go to New York several times and a few other places. I can't think of some of the names of the places where we were, but we got to visit a little bit up there and have a few experiences in the big city of New York. But finally come the time, and I believe it was August, time they were going to send us overseas. And of course, they wanted nobody to know. So time and time again, we'd kiss our wives goodbye that we were leaving, and we'd ride around all night and show back up the next morning, same place. This happened over and over, I don't know how many different times, until finally it did happen. They put us on a boat and we started over. We were in these Victor ships, and I think each one of them held about 1,500 people. Of course, we had a whole division. I don't know what else was going along with us, but that made at least 12, 15 boats that we had to go over. And of course, on the way, we'd always get these scares that they were fixing to torpedo our boats, so we zigzagging this way and that way, and the boats would rock until while you were trying to eat, and you had to hold on to your plate, or if you turn your plate loose, it would slide all the way to the other end, and you'd have to catch it on the way back. It was pretty agonizing to say the least, and plus the fact that the health officer on our boat, he got sick. We hadn't been offshore 200 yards, I don't believe, until he got sick. And we were 13 days going over, and I think he stayed sick the whole 13 days. And of course, I could do pretty well until I'd go where the rest of the men were, and with them vomiting and this, that, and the other, my stomach was so weak I'd have to vomit too. And once you start looking at all that stuff, it doesn't take much to make you sick. So we had a real good time going over. And I would say that just about everybody was sick at some time or other on the way, and some of them stayed sick most of the way over. And as I say, 13 days seemed like a year. And of course, we docked off the shore of England for one night, and then we went to Cherbourg. And at Cherbourg, we were the first troops to actually land at Cherbourg, because the Germans had kind of been pushed away from that particular place earlier, and so we did get to land without any fighting at that point. And we were in the hedgerows there of France, which I think you've seen a lot of them. About every 2 acres had a hedgerow around it that was about head high, and you couldn't see beyond that. So it could be tanks, they can be machine guns, they can be anything less than 200 yards away, and you couldn't see it. So we set camp up there, and not too far from Omaha Beach, and not too far from St. Lo. And I'm sure you read about St. Lo and heard about it. It was completely level. You couldn't even tell where the streets had been there. It had been leveled to the point where about, say, 4 or 5 feet high, and you just drove over it. You didn't drive down the street through it. You drove more or less over the town. And while we were there in the hedgerows, they were having a transportation problem getting materials up to the fighting troops that were actually going through France, and they couldn't keep materials to them. So they took our trucks, drivers, and of course a lot of other people who became drivers to deliver what goods up to the front lines. And of course that was what was known as the Red Ball Express. I think you heard that on the news and read it in the papers and so forth. But that went on for about a couple of weeks after we landed. And then, of course, after that, we got organized and entered combat, actual combat. And that was, I believe it was in September of '44. And, of course, I think now probably I should tell you actually what my job was in the service. At this time that this was going on, I was a captain, and I had been a forward observer back in training. And forward observer is the one that goes up the front and picks out good locations to observe enemy people from, usually in the steeple of churches or in high places. Of course, it's the places that the enemy first wants to shoot down. As soon as they start drawing fire on them, they want to shoot those places down. So you kind of up and down after you start shooting them. They start shooting at you, so you got to make a dash for the basement or wherever you can get for a while until it slows down a little bit. And of course, after we'd gotten overseas, at that time I was S2, which job consists of interrogating prisoners, also head of the forward observers, telling them where to go and placing them in positions where they can best see the enemy and what the enemy is doing, and also the survey work, locating targets and surveying them, their guns in so that they can hit these targets. And of course, closely coordinated with the CP, the battalion commander, and the S3 and S1, and the artillery. Of course, we had the 105 howitzer, which is pulled by trucks at that time. Now I think they put them all on tanks. At that time, they were pulled by trucks, and have 3 batteries, 3 firing batteries in each battalion of artillery, and each battalion is connected with an infantry regiment, and they have 3 different infantry regiments within a division, whereby you work with a certain regiment, which we did. We worked with the 406 infantry regiment, and very closely. So if they wanted us, they wanted fire on a certain position, well, it was our job to get it on that position. And of course, it was a whole lot my job to see we had forward observers in position to see all these different locations that might need to fire. And of course, I don't know if you know about artillery. You don't fire that direct. You fire it more indirectly because it doesn't shoot a straight shell. You probably try to hide your gun behind hills or trees or whatever, and you shoot over them and let it fall. Of course, you can raise your guns above a certain height, a certain level, and you can start bringing your shells back. In other words, you can shoot over a mountain and hit something not too far from the top of the mountain down in the valley. Of course, the artillery we had we could shoot up places about 15 miles away. Ordinarily, we try to get our position within 3,000 to 4,000 yards, which is about 2 miles from the target in which we were going to shoot. But of course, the time they pulled back, kept pulling back, we could be firing as far as 15,000 yards, which is almost 10 miles. That's almost from here to Thomason. And of course, you always tried to put your observers in the highest points you could find so they could see the best targets. And you would zero in on different intersections, different places, and give those places a number, a concentration number, whereby, say, a bunch of vehicles were fixing to approach the intersection in a certain place, you tell your artillery people back at where they were firing to get ready to fire on concentration, say 242, and you'd tell them when to fire. You'd tell them hold it, and whenever you felt like that the most trucks would be at that intersection, well, you'd tell them to fire, and you'd get all your guns firing on that intersection. You get a lot of vehicles, you get a lot of trade at one time. And of course, in Germany, a lot of them rode bicycles, and they were awfully surprised at times to get knocked off their bicycles when they approached different corners and different landmarks. And of course, back in the States, we spent an awful lot of time digging foxholes. That's one of the things the men really liked best, I think, was digging these foxholes. Of course, it so happened when we got over there that very seldom ever a foxhole was dug, because the Germans had dug them ahead of time as they had this territory. And as we pushed them back, as they left, they left the foxhole. And sometimes it was quite surprising to find yourself in a foxhole with a couple of dead Germans. I remember one of the early parts of the combat I was up looking for gun positions for our guns, and the aircraft came over strafing, so I ran to the nearest foxhole and jumped in. And at the end of each foxhole, there was a dead German, and it was quite satisfying to see that they were dead instead of alive, because it had been a little embarrassing if they'd been alive, I believe. So we didn't have to dig the foxhole that we dug back in the States. We usually stayed in basements of homes as we moved forward, and sometimes in houses, but basements mainly. And of course, over there it was, I'd say, from November on till about April, there was snow on the ground or frozen. So foxholes would have been a little hard to dig at that time anyway. And I don't know. These artillery shells, I don't know if I mentioned that. They weigh 45 pounds. Each shell weighs 45 pounds. And of course, we could fire them with time fuses, whereby they'd go off above the ground, any length that you wanted above the ground. So we found out against as troops, it's best to fire time fuses so they'd go off about 30 feet in the air. And of course, if you were in the foxhole, they can get you in the foxhole just the same as it would be if you was out above the ground. So when those shells burst 30 feet above the ground, they go every which way, and they can go down get into the foxhole. So a lot of the Germans were done away with in their foxhole. Of course, I mentioned a while ago about being S2. That's interrogation of prisoners. One of my jobs, getting all the information I can get out of the other German soldiers, so we know kind of what they were planning on doing. So it so happened that the driver of my Jeep he was my radio operator and also a machine gun operator. We had a machine gun mounted on our Jeep, and he also could speak German, so he had many jobs that he helped me with and was very good at. And as we interrogated prisoners, a lot of them would talk, and a lot of them didn't much want to talk. So we had a little problem from time to time to get them to talk. And of course, one of the things I did that probably sounded a little cruel was that I'd have them lay down and have my driver mark off their grave, and they'd get up and he'd give them a shovel and they'd start digging. And usually, well, always, they were ready to talk after they got about a foot deep. But so it worked pretty well. And I even found that's worked pretty good, even my school business down the line, that I get kids to talk. It's always been true. If more than one was in on anything, you could always get the truth out of them by interrogating one at a time. And they're afraid not to tell. Of course, one other way I had of getting these prisoners to talk was we'd tell them that we'd turn over half of our prisoners to the Russians. And of course, you might know which prisoners we're going to turn over to the Russians. It's going to be those that don't talk. And a lot of them are cooperative, so we're going to turn the ones over that won't talk to them. So they didn't want to be one of those that was turned over to the Russians. So they would do a little talking. But they really did have some pretty tough soldiers. Some of them was pretty hard to make talk. And of course, going through France, we got through it pretty good, and then we got on up into Belgium, Holland, and that's where it began to get pretty tough. And then we got on into Germany, and of course, the people there, a lot of civilians, they'd shoot you or anything if you had to be very careful. Even with them, of course, a lot of them moved on away, moved out, but a lot of them wouldn't want to stay in their homes, and lots of time we'd have to put them out of their houses at night when we decided to take their homes for the evening. And a lot of them act like they didn't much want to give them up, which you can't much blame them, but we always felt like they were the reason that we were over there. So why should we sleep out in the cold and freezing weather while they had a warm place? And so we kind of took over the places that we wanted for the time, for the night or 2 nights, depending upon how long we were going to be there. And of course, most of the time too, of course, we stayed in the basements rather than the upper part of the houses.